It started as an ordinary weekend trip. A small group of friends decided to explore a quiet forest far from the city noise. They had planned to take photos of old trees, enjoy the fresh air, and spend a few peaceful days camping. The path they followed wasn't popular. It was one of those narrow trails that felt untouched, surrounded by thick trees and silence that seemed to listen. By the second day, the group had wandered deeper into the woods than they planned. The air grew cooler, the ground softer, and the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Everything around them felt strangely heavy, as if the forest was guarding something. One of them pointed out an odd glimmer between the trees, a dull reflection, almost metallic. At first they thought it might be a piece of old machinery or maybe a wrecked vehicle, but as they moved closer, the reflection stretched wider, taller, and more massive than anything they'd expected to see in a place like that. The sight made them stop. Before them stood what looked like the side of a ship, a massive metal wall curving slightly, its surface covered in rust and moss. They exchanged confused looks. It couldn't be a ship, not here. There was no water, no river big enough to float something of that size. The nearest coast was miles away. They circled around the structure, their footsteps crunching softly against fallen leaves. The closer they got, the clearer it became. The shape, the railings, even the faint outline of what looked like windows, it was all real. It wasn't an illusion or some forgotten building. It was an enormous cruise ship standing right there in the middle of the woods, as if the forest had grown around it over time. The silence felt heavier now. One of them tried calling out half-jokingly to see if anyone would answer. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing back from the metal. No reply came, only the faint rustle of leaves and a distant bird call. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Who would build a ship here, and how could something that large even get there? Their phones came out instantly. They started taking videos, walking slowly along the side of the structure, showing the details. The faded paint, the ropes still hanging from rusted hooks, and what looked like an old staircase half buried in vines. When they uploaded a short clip online that night, it exploded. Within hours, people across the internet were watching the video and asking the same question. How could a cruise ship end up in the middle of a forest? Some thought it was a movie set. Others joked it was proof of aliens. A few older locals left comments saying they had heard stories about something strange, hidden deep in those woods, but never believed them until now. The next morning, the group decided to return to the site, this time with better equipment and flashlights. The early fog made the forest look even more mysterious. Their breath turned white in the cold air as they followed the same trail back. Each step felt heavier with curiosity and excitement. When they reached the clearing, the ship looked even larger than they remembered. Its hull stretched endlessly, towering above the treetops. They noticed the faint remains of a wooden fence and what seemed to be an old sign lying face down in the mud. When they flipped it over, they could barely read the faded letters. It said something about private property and construction restricted. Whatever had been planned here was abandoned long ago. One of them spotted a narrow opening along the ship's side, covered by thick vines. It looked like a maintenance hatch, maybe once used by workers. Curiosity took over, and they decided to peek inside. The light from their flashlights caught a long corridor lined with metal walls. Dust floated in the air like glitter, disturbed for the first time in years. The place smelled of rust and old wood. It was both eerie and beautiful. They didn't go far inside that day. The air felt too heavy and the structure seemed unstable. Still, what they saw was enough to leave them speechless. There were railings, faded signs pointing to cabin levels, and even a staircase leading upward. It was as if someone had tried to build a real cruise ship down to the smallest detail, then simply left it there to rot. News spread quickly. Within a week, journalists and explorers began arriving in the nearby town, hoping to find the mysterious ship in the woods. The locals were both amused and cautious. One older man who had lived there all his life told reporters that the ship had been there long before most of them were born. He said that as a child he was warned never to go near it. People called it the Steel Ghost. According to him, workers came and went for years, then one day everything stopped. Trucks stopped arriving. Lights went out. The place was sealed and left behind. His story only deepened the mystery. There were no official records of any construction project of that scale in the area. The government archives had nothing. Some said it was a secret research facility disguised as a ship. Others believed it was a rich man's unfinished dream. A few days later, drone footage revealed the full size of the structure. It wasn't just a small vessel. It was nearly as long as a real cruise ship, with multiple decks and windows running along its sides. The roof had trees growing through it now, nature slowly claiming it back. People from nearby villages started sharing old rumors. Some said strange lights were seen coming from the woods decades ago. Others mentioned trucks carrying massive metal parts through rural roads at night. No one ever knew where those parts ended up, until now. By this point, online videos of the ship had millions of views. Urban explorers began planning trips, hoping to be the first to enter and document what lay inside. The local authorities eventually had to put up barriers and signs warning people to stay out, calling it unsafe. Of course, that only made it more tempting for adventurers. Meanwhile, the group who found it felt both proud and uneasy. They hadn't expected their discovery to blow up like this. One of them admitted that the first night after returning home, they couldn't sleep. The image of that massive ship standing quietly among the trees kept replaying in their mind. It didn't feel like just an old structure. It felt like something waiting to be found for a reason. Over the next few weeks, researchers and journalists tried to trace any record that could explain its origin. There were no shipping company connections, no building permits, nothing in old newspapers. It was as if someone had erased every trace of its existence. Then a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A retired construction worker, now living in another city, reached out after seeing the viral video. He said he had worked on a strange project in the 1970s that matched the description perfectly. According to him, a wealthy man had hired a private team to build a full-scale cruise ship replica far from any water. The idea sounded insane, but the pay was good. The man said he wanted to bring the sea to the forest. The project went on for years. They built the main hull, the decks, and parts of the interior. Then suddenly the funding stopped. The mysterious owner disappeared, and the workers were told to leave. No explanation was given. Everything, including the ship, was left behind. This story matched what the locals had been saying for years, though no one had proof until now. Curiosity about the hidden ship only grew stronger. Filmmakers, historians, and engineers all wanted to see it. People started calling it the forest liner. Even with its rusted walls and decaying decks, it stood as a strange monument to forgotten dreams, yet what drew people in most wasn't just its size or mystery. It was the feeling that the place held secrets no one had yet uncovered. The structure looked quiet from the outside, but something about it felt alive, as if every creak of metal and whisper of wind through its halls carried an untold story. The group who found it decided that one day they would go back. Not just to look at it from the outside, but to step inside and explore every level, to see what was hidden deep within. They didn't know yet what they would find, or how much their discovery would reveal about the man who built it. But one thing was certain. The hidden giant cruise ship in the woods had only just begun to tell its story. After the discovery spread across the internet, people couldn't stop talking about the strange ship hidden deep inside the forest. Reporters kept visiting the small nearby town asking the same question: who built it and why? For a while, no one had a clear answer. The only clues were the rusted metal, faded signs, and a few old stories, passed down by locals who had seen mysterious trucks moving through the woods decades ago. When a retired construction worker came forward saying he had once worked on a massive ship project in that very area, everything started to make sense. His memory wasn't perfect after all these years, but what he remembered was enough to open a door to the past. He said the project began sometime in the early 1970s, led by a man whose name few people ever knew. He was described as wealthy, private, and obsessed with building something no one else had ever attempted. He had bought a huge piece of land miles away from any town, surrounded by dense forest and small hills. No one understood why he chose that spot. He told his small team that he wanted peace, that the city made people restless and small-minded. Out here, he said, ideas could breathe freely. The crew started by clearing trees and flattening the land. At first, they assumed he was planning to build a large mansion or perhaps a secret retreat. Then came the day when dozens of trucks arrived carrying steel sheets, beams, and shipbuilding materials. That's when the workers realized he was serious. He was building a cruise ship right in the middle of the woods. They couldn't believe it. Some of them joked that maybe he planned to dig a canal to the sea. Others thought he had lost his mind. But the pay was high and he treated his workers well. He visited the site every day, walking among them quietly, often sketching in his notebook and giving small but precise instructions. He didn't like to be photographed or asked personal questions. What mattered to him was the work, the shape, the design, the dream. He hired engineers from different countries, bringing in talent that was far ahead of its time. The plan showed not just a ship, but an entire floating city. The design had solar panels, hidden mechanical systems, and rooms that could function independently of outside power. He called it Project Haven. According to the worker, the man spoke about creating a place where people could live in peace, free from noise, politics, and pollution. A world within walls of steel. Construction went on for years. The main structure took shape, rising like a giant from the soil. From a distance, it looked as if the forest itself had given birth to it. The hull was built to scale, just like a real ship. And the interior spaces were designed to resemble luxury decks, dining halls, and sleeping cabins. Workers often said it felt strange to walk through those rooms knowing they would never sail. The idea of a ship trapped in trees felt poetic and sad at the same time. Yet the man behind the project seemed deeply devoted. He would often sit in one of the upper rooms at sunset, watching the forest glow orange through unfinished windows. He once told a worker, "The sea doesn't always mean water. Sometimes it's a place inside the mind." No one really understood him, but they respected him. He was different from most rich men they had met. He didn't boast or show off. He cared about details, how the walls curved, how the light would fall across the dining area, how sound would echo through the halls. He even had a small group of artists painting murals along the corridors, scenes of oceans, whales, and skies filled with stars. Then, something changed. Around the mid-1970s, construction began to slow down. Fewer materials arrived. Some workers were suddenly told not to come back. Only a small group remained, working mostly at night. The man became quieter, more secretive. He built a small private office inside the ship and started locking himself in for hours. Sometimes people heard strange mechanical sounds from below deck, machines that no one had installed or understood. Rumors spread among the remaining crew. Some believed he was working on some kind of new energy system. Others thought he was hiding something. He stopped paying visits to the local town altogether. Supplies were brought in only by specific trucks, and the drivers were told not to talk to anyone. Then one day he was gone. The workers arrived and were told the project had been shut down. A representative came to the site, handed out final payments, and told them to leave the area immediately. No explanation, no warning. Some workers said they saw men in dark suits taking boxes from the ship that night, loading them into vans. By morning, the place was silent. Within months, nature began to take over. Weeds grew through the cracks, rainwater filled the lower decks, and trees slowly wrapped their roots around the hull. Birds built nests where chandeliers were supposed to hang. The great Project Haven was forgotten, and the man behind it vanished without a trace. Years turned into decades. The local children made up stories about the ship. Some said it was haunted. Others said it was cursed. Adults rarely spoke about it, except for a few old-timers who still remembered the strange years when the forest echoed with the sound of hammers and metal. When the video of the ship surfaced again after so many years, historians tried to find official records of the man who built it. Nothing appeared. No land ownership files, no business registrations, no death certificate. It was as if he had been erased from history. One journalist found a clue, hidden in an old library archive, a magazine article from 1973 that mentioned an eccentric inventor who wanted to build a self-sustaining cruise ship on land. The article didn't give his full name, only the initials HL. It said he had once been a naval architect who worked on advanced marine designs before leaving the industry after a personal tragedy. No one knew what that tragedy was, but some believed it drove him to isolate himself in the woods. He was described as brilliant, stubborn, and visionary. The article quoted him saying, "The future of humanity is not in the stars, but in what we can build for ourselves here on Earth." It was the only surviving record that even hinted at who he was. People who visited the site later said they could feel his presence there. Every corner of the ship seemed designed with a purpose. The rooms were arranged perfectly, as if he expected people to live there someday. Some of the walls had handwritten numbers and markings, maybe measurements or codes. A few explorers found blueprints left behind, showing detailed layouts for systems that didn't exist back then, like renewable air circulation, water recycling, and energy storage. Experts who studied those documents were amazed. They said whoever designed it had ideas far beyond the technology of that era. Some even wondered if parts of the ship were meant to move or transform, like a hybrid between a building and a vessel. Over time, stories about the man turned into legend. Some said he had been silenced by powerful people because his inventions were too advanced. Others said he had gone mad and disappeared into the woods. There were even rumors that he had built a secret underground chamber beneath the ship, where he continued his experiments in isolation. No one ever proved any of it. The truth remained buried under decades of silence and soil. Still, there was something undeniably human about his dream. Maybe he just wanted to build something that would last forever, a place where people could escape, find peace, and start over. Maybe it was never meant to be understood, only seen and remembered. When people now stand before that massive ship, half-eaten by trees, they can almost imagine him walking its decks again, looking out at his creation with quiet pride. The forest has become his ocean, the wind his waves. The mystery of the man and his impossible project continues to pull people in. Engineers study it, artists paint it, storytellers try to capture its spirit. Yet no one has ever truly explained how he managed to build something so massive in complete secrecy. The ship remains there to this day, silent but unbroken, a strange monument to human imagination. It carries the ghost of a dream that never sailed but never sank either. As the sun sets behind its rusted frame, the metal still glows faintly, as if remembering the hands that shaped it and the vision that refused to die. And though the man who built it has long vanished, the story of his hidden giant cruise ship in the woods has only just begun to resurface, piece by piece, as the world rediscovers what he left behind. Weeks after the discovery went viral, people from all over began showing up near the forest. Journalists, researchers, explorers. Everyone wanted a look at the mysterious cruise ship that had somehow ended up in the middle of nowhere. The local police had already fenced off the area, warning that the structure was unsafe. But that didn't stop those determined to see it with their own eyes. Among them was the same group who had found it first. They had become minor celebrities online after their video blew up, yet deep down, what mattered more to them wasn't fame. It was curiosity. They couldn't stop thinking about what lay inside. The memory of that dark hallway and the echo of their voices still haunted them, so they made a plan. This time they would go inside properly, explore it fully, and record everything. Early one misty morning, they returned with flashlights, cameras, ropes, and protective gear. The forest was quiet except for the sound of dripping water from the leaves. It took them almost 2 hours to reach the clearing again. When they finally stood in front of the massive ship, it looked even more unreal than before. The vines had grown thicker, crawling up the sides like nature was trying to hide it again. They found the same small opening they had used before and carefully stepped through. The air inside felt cold and heavy, like stepping into another world. Their flashlights swept across the walls, revealing layers of dust and rust. It was silent except for the faint creak of metal as the wind moved through broken vents. The first corridor they entered stretched far ahead, lined with doors on each side. Some were half open, others sealed shut by time. The paint had peeled away, and the metal floor echoed under their boots. On one wall, faded letters still spelled Cabin Section B. They opened one of the cabin doors. Inside was a small room, bed frame, desk, and a broken mirror. Everything was covered in dust, yet it all looked frozen, as if someone had left yesterday. A glass lay on the table, still standing after all these years. It was strange how something so abandoned could still feel so alive. They moved slowly, documenting everything, whispering to each other even though they didn't need to. The place demanded quiet. It wasn't fear, it was respect. In another hallway, they found what looked like a dining area. Long tables stood in neat rows, chairs still pushed in as if waiting for guests who never came. The ceiling above had ornate light fixtures, their crystals coated in dust. One of the explorers pointed out a painting on the wall, a large mural showing an ocean sunset. The paint had faded, but it was beautiful. It reminded them that the man who built this place wasn't just an engineer. He was an artist with a dream. Deeper inside, the air changed. It smelled damp and metallic. Their flashlights reflected off puddles of water on the floor. They followed a staircase upward and arrived at what must have been the main deck. Here, the forest light filtered through broken panels, casting long beams across the floor. Birds fluttered out as they entered, startling everyone for a moment. They stood there in silence, taking it all in. It was a breathtaking sight. The wide deck stretching before them, railings covered in moss, and the forest canopy peeking through broken windows. The air felt almost sacred. Then one of them noticed something odd. On the far side of the deck, behind a set of rotted doors, there was a smaller passage leading down. The doorway was half hidden behind a fallen beam. They moved the debris aside and shone their lights through. A narrow staircase led deeper into the ship's lower levels. It was dark, far darker than the rest of the place. A strange, cool breeze drifted from below, carrying the scent of wet iron. They hesitated for a moment. Every part of their body told them it might not be safe, but curiosity pushed them forward. Step by step, they descended. The air grew colder, and the light from above slowly faded. Their flashlights illuminated thick pipes running along the walls, some still intact, others dripping with rust. The sound of dripping water echoed around them. At the bottom, the hallway opened into a wide space that looked different from the rest of the ship. The walls here were smoother, newer somehow, like this area had been built separately or finished later. There were control panels, wires, and machinery lined up neatly. Though all of it was long dead, it didn't look like part of a cruise ship at all. It looked more like a lab. On one wall, they found old charts pinned up, diagrams of energy systems, pressure readings, and handwritten notes that were hard to read. One explorer brushed the dust off a nearby control board and noticed a label that said, "Environmental Module." None of them understood what it meant. Beside the machine stood several metal cabinets. They opened them carefully. Inside were old tools, notebooks, and sealed glass containers filled with unknown materials. One of the notebooks had pages full of sketches, drawings of turbines, solar systems, and handwritten lines describing energy independence and closed-loop air support. They realized then that this must have been the heart of the project. Maybe this was where the mysterious builder had worked before everything stopped. It was as if they had stepped into the center of his mind, frozen in time. As they explored further, one of them found a small wooden door tucked behind a large metal tank. It was almost hidden from sight. When they opened it, they discovered a small room that looked more personal, an office maybe. A desk stood in the corner, papers scattered across it. A chair lay on its side as if someone had left in a hurry. On the desk sat an old photograph inside a cracked frame. It showed the man they had read about, the reclusive builder, standing proudly in front of the half-finished ship, smiling faintly. Behind him, the forest looked much younger, the trees thinner and the sky brighter. They also found a small box filled with notes written in his handwriting. Most were sketches and ideas, but one note stood out. It read, "If they find this place, they will know what I tried to do." The future must live somewhere. The group fell silent. They looked around the dark room, the cold air wrapping around them. None of them spoke for a long time. It was as if they were standing in the presence of someone's dream, a dream that never reached the world but never completely died either. When they finally decided to head back, the forest outside had started to darken. They climbed the stairs again, their flashlights flickering as the batteries weakened. Every sound, every creak of metal or whisper of wind made them glance back. By the time they stepped out into the open air, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. They sat down for a while, catching their breath, staring up at the enormous hull behind them. None of them could describe the feeling. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper, a mix of sadness, admiration, and awe. That night, back in their tents, they reviewed the footage they had recorded. The images looked unreal. The grand halls, the untouched rooms, the mysterious machinery. The online world would soon explode again when they shared it. But for now, they kept it to themselves. They wanted to understand what they had seen before letting the rest of the world see it too. Over the next few days, they returned several times. Each visit revealed something new. A hidden passage, a mural half buried in dirt, another set of blueprints scattered across a floor. Every clue seemed to whisper the same story. The man who built this ship wasn't just trying to make something grand. He was trying to change the way people lived. In one of their last visits, they explored the ship's upper level, where a wide observation room overlooked the forest. The view was breathtaking. The sun filtered through broken glass panels, lighting the metal walls in gold. On one wall, written faintly in paint, were the words, "Still waiting to sail." It gave them chills. They realized this ship had never truly been abandoned. It was simply waiting for someone to remember it to finish what had been started. When they finally left the forest for good, they promised to tell the story with care. Not as a tale of ghosts or conspiracy, but as a story of a man's impossible dream. The giant cruise ship standing in the woods was more than a mystery. It was a reminder of how far imagination can go, even when the world forgets it. And as they packed up and walked away, one of them turned back for a final look. The ship stood tall and quiet, bathed in the last light of the evening. For a moment it almost looked alive again, its rusted body glowing softly as if grateful to be seen. What none of them knew then was that their discovery had only scratched the surface. The secrets buried deeper inside the ship, hidden behind sealed doors and forgotten blueprints, were far stranger and far more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. After the explorers' videos spread online again, the world became obsessed with the mysterious ship in the forest. Scientists, historians, and engineers all wanted to understand how such a massive structure ended up there and what purpose it truly served. The story had already captured millions, but what came next would take it from strange to unbelievable. The original group who had found the ship received hundreds of messages, people offering help, others begging for more footage, and even a few claiming to know what the ship really was. Most messages were wild theories, but one stood out. It came from a man who said he was once an assistant to the ship's builder. He refused to reveal his full name, but he said he could explain everything, if they were willing to listen. They met him in a small town near the forest. He was an older man, quiet and nervous, constantly glancing around as if worried someone might be watching. He said he hadn't spoken about the project in nearly 50 years. He began slowly, his voice shaky but sincere. The ship, he explained, was never meant to sail. It was designed as a prototype for a self-sustaining habitat, what the builder called the New Ark. His goal was to create a place where people could live independently from the outside world, using only renewable systems and natural cycles. The lower levels weren't meant for passengers. They were designed for power generation, water filtration, and environmental control. At first, the explorers thought he was exaggerating. But then he handed them something, a small notebook, its pages yellow and fragile. Inside were detailed sketches and handwritten notes describing advanced systems, solar energy storage, artificial air renewal, and hydroponic food chambers. The handwriting matched the notes they had already seen inside the ship. According to the man, the builder had been working on secret technology, something that could make the ship completely self-sufficient. He was planning to turn it into a living, breathing ecosystem that could function without fuel or external resources. He had called it Project Haven, the same name the old worker had mentioned years ago. The explorers listened in silence. Everything they had seen inside the ship suddenly began to make sense. The machines, the control panels, the sealed rooms. The old man went on to say that in the final months of construction, the builder became increasingly paranoid. He stopped letting government inspectors visit the site and told his team to destroy all official paperwork. He believed powerful companies were watching him, trying to steal his ideas. Then one night he disappeared. The remaining workers were paid off and ordered to leave. No one ever saw him again. When the group asked the man what he thought had happened, he hesitated. "Some say he was taken," he whispered. "Others say he left on his own terms. Maybe he just wanted to live inside his creation, away from everyone." After the meeting, the group decided to go back to the ship one final time. This time, to search the lower decks more carefully. They wanted to find proof that what the old man said was true. The next morning, they set out early. The forest felt different that day. Colder, quieter, as if it knew they were about to uncover something it had hidden for too long. When they reached the ship, fog hung low around it, curling through the trees. They entered through the same hatch as before and followed their familiar route through the main corridor and dining area. Everything was still, frozen in time. They reached the lower stairway and began their descent. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell of rust and damp air became. Their flashlights flickered across the walls, showing pipes, wires, and machines they hadn't seen before. One of them noticed a small vent with air still faintly moving through it. That shouldn't have been possible after 50 years. When they reached the bottom level, they realized they were standing in a section they hadn't explored before. A heavy metal door stood ahead, slightly open. Inside was a large room unlike any they'd seen. The floor was made of thick steel panels, and the walls were lined with complex machinery, turbines, tanks, and what looked like a network of glass tubes. At the center of the room stood a glass enclosure about the size of a small car. Inside it were plants, real living plants, green and healthy, growing under dim, flickering lights. The group froze. They couldn't believe their eyes. How are they alive? One of them whispered. They moved closer. The air inside the room felt different, cleaner, warmer. The machines surrounding the enclosure were humming faintly, powered by something still running deep within the ship. They looked around and found a control panel with a small indicator light still glowing weakly. Somehow part of the ship was still functioning. One of them found another notebook sitting on a nearby desk. The cover was cracked, but the pages were still legible. It contained records of experiments, testing soil, monitoring air quality, tracking water usage. It seemed the builder had successfully created a miniature ecosystem that could sustain itself indefinitely. They realized then that he hadn't just been building a home or a ship. He had been building a model of the future, proof that humanity could live in balance with nature even in isolation. The more they explored, the stranger it became. Another room contained what looked like sleeping quarters, but they were different. Small pods lined against the walls with glass covers, each labeled with numbers and notes. They weren't sure if they had ever been used. Everything looked perfectly preserved, untouched by time. As they moved deeper, they found one final door. It was sealed shut, covered in warning signs. They hesitated, but curiosity got the better of them. They pried it open with metal tools, and behind it was a staircase leading even further down. This level felt different. The walls were smooth and white, and the air was thick with dust. They found a room that seemed to serve as a command center. Old monitors sat on a control desk, their screens cracked and black. On one wall hung a large map of the world, marked with lines and notes written in faded ink. The words Phase 2 were written at the top. There was also a small metal locker in the corner. Inside it, they found a series of letters sealed in envelopes. Each one was addressed simply to the future. The letters described the builder's vision in his own words. He wrote about how the world was changing too fast, how pollution and greed were taking over, and how he believed the only solution was to build something that could exist outside that chaos. He wanted to create a sanctuary, a place where people could live simply, surrounded by life instead of destroying it. His last letter ended with a haunting line. If this ship remains hidden, then it means humanity was not ready. But if it is found, then maybe there is still hope. The group sat in silence after reading it. No one knew what to say. It was as if they had just uncovered not a mystery, but a message meant for them, and for everyone living today. When they left the lower deck, they looked around one last time. The quiet hum of the machine seemed almost peaceful now. The plants inside the glass enclosure swayed gently under the faint light, alive and thriving, as if the ship itself was breathing. They stepped outside into the forest. The air felt colder but somehow fresher too. Behind them, the ship stood still and proud, half hidden by fog and trees. The forest had tried to bury it, but it hadn't succeeded. The dream inside was still alive. In the following days, they shared parts of what they found, but not everything. They agreed that some things should remain untouched, at least for now. The story was no longer just about an abandoned ship. It was about a man who dreamed of saving the future long before anyone else cared to. Scientists who later studied the footage confirmed that the technology they saw was far ahead of its time. The systems inside the ship were designed using methods that wouldn't become common until decades later. Some even believed that if the project had continued, it might have changed the course of environmental science forever. Today, the ship still stands where it always has, hidden in the woods, surrounded by whispers and wonder. Many people visit just to see it from afar. The government has protected the area, calling it a historical landmark of innovation. No one is allowed to go inside anymore, but those who did say they can never forget the feeling of being there, the strange calm, the quiet heartbeat of a forgotten dream at night. Locals sometimes claim they see a faint light glowing from within the ship, deep in the forest. Some say it's just the moonlight reflecting on the metal. Others like to believe it's something else, that maybe the systems inside are still alive, still doing what they were built to do, keeping that tiny green world alive in the dark. Whatever the truth is, the hidden giant cruise ship remains a symbol of human imagination, Proof that one person's dream, even if forgotten, can survive time itself. And somewhere deep inside its rusted walls, among the vines and silence, the dream continues to breathe, waiting for the day the world finally understands what it was meant to be.